As Shaul Paul so eloquently put it, the feasts of the Lord are all prophetic shadow pictures of good things to come. They are literally the mechanism whereby the Almighty has told us the end of time from the very beginning. And as the first four Gospels detail the Messiah as he fulfills the spring feast of the Lord, yet the book of the Revelation details how the Messiah will fulfill the fall feast of the Lord. And it is that yearly cycle that we keep track of, and we look at these things prophetically and see that after Shavuot, when the Holy Spirit was given, then we have, according to Leviticus 23, we have a time period in which the corners of the field are not to be harvested, and there's to be no gleaning. That is to be left to the poor and to the Gentiles. And the very next verse is concerning the fall feast of the Lord. This prophetically is the time of the Gentiles. And we are living right now in the time of the Gentiles, but that time is coming to a close. Things are going to be changing in the world, and we have a guest for this next series that is going to be taking us into the part of the world where everything revolves around this and what is going to be transpiring in the end time. He is the author of When a Jew Rules the World, which is a day that I'm looking forward to with excited anticipation, yet it is a little bit of a time off. This series we are calling What in the World is Happening Before He Returns. And for the most part, the Christian world is looking only for one thing to happen. They think that for the most part, in regular Christian world, the people that show up to church once in a while and watch Christian television, they think the next thing on the prophetic calendar is the return of Jesus. It's going to happen any moment, which displays a great ignorance of the scriptures and the prophetic scriptures, because there are so many things that the prophets tell us is going to be transpiring before he returns. And this is the focus of where we are going to be going. We have with us New York Times best-selling author, the author of The Islamic Antichrist, Joel Richardson. Joel, it is good to have you here on Shabbat Night Live.
Michael, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much.
Joel, you have been immersed in your ministry and your life in a part of the world and in a culture that is so foreign to the Western world, and really what we are seeing now with so much of the controversy, so much of the troubles brewing in Europe, the United States, and the whole Islamic world, and what's happening with the wars and the refugees and all, and it is scaring a lot of Americans. But I have to point this out to our viewers out there, that this is not something that scares Joel, because he goes in rescue missions, in service missions behind enemy lines over in battle-torn areas of the Middle East. This is a world that you understand. Your heart has been moved in this area early on, and I have to say, in reviewing your books and in some of your DVDs, and you're not only a prolific prose author, but you also produce films and also teachings. You put a lot of stuff out there, and I'd like you to take us back into your life a little bit. What happened in your life to set you on this path? Because I have to say that with what I'm seeing, that I asked you to begin with, when we first met, what message is it? What are you sent to deliver? And it is so obvious that the Almighty has energized your life and set you apart for this, and put you in a place where you can speak to the world, and that's why you're here, because we want your message to go out. So give us a little background on that, Joel.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me just say I had a radical conversion experience at 19. So 1991, I was just a real street punk from South Boston, South Shore, Massachusetts, and I had been raised nominally Catholic a little bit until I was about 11 or so. Had a vague belief in God, but I had a radical, powerful conversion experience at 19. And so when I first came to faith, I didn't understand saved by grace through faith. I didn't understand any of this. I just knew that I had to give my life to the Lord. The Lord made it very clear to me that if I didn't completely give my life to Him that night, that he was confronting me, that my eternal destiny would be in the hellfire. I mean, he made it very clear. The trajectory of your life is heading toward the lake of fire. And so I just said, my life is yours.
And it was probably heading to prison, too, the way things were going.
Prison, I would have been lucky. I would have been lucky if I ended up in prison.
So this is a radical change at 19.
It was, and I shocked my whole community. You know, Paul kind of references, he says, even among those who are pillars among the apostles, well, I was a pillar among potheads, but much worse than just that. But so it was a shock when a pillar suddenly came to faith. But it was very shortly thereafter. I was at the church that I was going to. It was a Pentecostal church in Brockton, Massachusetts. Had a missionary had come in who was working in Kazakhstan. He was working among Muslims, among the poorest of the poor. And as a new believer for the first time, he explained the 1040 window, so that's this part of the world that the majority of the unreached peoples live, and it's also where many Muslims live. And he explained...
Now explain what 1040 is, that 1040 window for our viewers.
So it's dealing with longitude, latitude, so it's basically this whole block that includes the Middle East. It spreads all the way across India, you know, up into some of the Istans, the southern former Soviet nations, down into, again, south of Arabia and much of North Africa. So this whole part of the world, this is the part of the world that needs to hear the gospel. People growing up, living and dying, having never heard a clear presentation of the gospel, never heard a clear testimony from a legitimate believer concerning who Jesus is, the gospel, the kingdom to come, any of these things, and dying for eternity without a clear witness. So this is the part of the world that needs the gospel. Well, beyond that, 85% of this unreached world that have never heard the gospel are Muslims. And yet we were sending at the time, again, 1991-92, we were sending less than 1% of our missionary force to that part of the world. And in just classic Pentecostal altar call form, I felt the call. I went to the altar and I knelt down and I said, Lord, I should be in hell right now. I should be in prison or in hell or dead, yet you saved me. If this is where you need people, then I'm going to give my life to this. And I felt the Spirit drawing me to give myself to the Islamic world. So that's where it all began. And I began the 5-year plan. You know, men make their plans, but the Lord directs their ultimate way. So I had my 5-year plan. I was going to get educated, get trained. I was going to go to the Middle East and give myself specifically to the Muslim world. Now, again, Muslims are not just in the Middle East. They're, you know, Indonesia, the largest, most populous Muslim nations in the world. Indonesia, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. So completely outside of the Middle East. But I felt called to the Middle East. And why? First of all, I think a big part of it is because it's biblical. I mean, this is the part of the world that the Bible is focused on. And, you know, as I talk about in When a Jew Rules the World, the Bible is a thoroughly Jerusalem-centric book. It's a book that revolves around the city of Jerusalem and Israel in the Middle East. You know, a lot of Americans, we naturally, we may not quite say it, but we think the world revolves around us. And so then we turn to the Bible.
All right, and you've seen evidence of that as you've traveled around the world. You mentioned that when you went to Australia, nobody there is saying, where's Australia in the Bible? But that is the repeated mantra in American Christianity. Where's America in the Bible? Like the world revolves around us.
Yeah, we think the world revolves around us. So then when we go to the Bible, we look at the prophecies of the end times, we just assume that God's world revolves around us. And we can't understand why we're not front and center in biblical prophecy. Now, granted, you could say, well, we're the most powerful military, most powerful economy in the world, etc. So we should be in there somewhere. But nevertheless, a big part of it is simply because the story revolves around the throne of David, around Jerusalem, around that spot where Jesus is coming back to rule the nations from. So understanding that that is the epicenter of the biblical story, this is the epicenter of the battles, the spiritual conflicts that will take place in the last days, this is what I felt called to. And so really for the past 20 plus years, I've given myself to dealing with issues related to Israel, yes, but largely dealing with the Islamic world. And in a very Pauline way, like the Apostle Paul, working among Muslims to bring in the fullness of the Gentiles in order that God can then turn back and bring in the fullness of Israel. And that is how we all as Gentiles are to understand the mission, the going forth of the gospel. We bring about the fullness of the Gentiles so that God can turn back to His covenant people and complete and put the cap on His grand plan of redemption.
Joel, I have to confess something to you that perhaps others can relate out there. The refugees that are coming into America, the number of Muslims that we're seeing more and more coming into the country, a lot of people very afraid of that. Just seeing what's going on in Europe, there is cause for some alarm, for consternation, and yet when I see Muslims here in America, and I have Muslim friends in the city of Jerusalem and Israel, been friends for 20 years, but yet when I see them, it's like, okay, here they are in our country, we have them cornered. We have freedom of speech. I can openly speak to them and witness to them, and I don't have to be afraid of them. I'm not on their territory. I'm not on their turf. I'm not going to get my head cut off here. But yet, it's like, how do I reach them? Because it's a culture so foreign to ours, but yet I feel that I am responsible to aggressively reach into their lives and to touch them. And this is something you've been prepared for your whole life. And this is one of the things I really feel that you bring to the table, is that for believers to understand we have a job to do. You are not just here in America where it's safe. You are over there in the heat of battle behind enemy lines going into their culture. You've been prepared for this, and you actually know how to reach them. And in this whole series that we do, I really want that to come out to where people can understand we've got a job to do. We can't shirk from it. We can't just throw our First Amendment rights under the bus and keep our mouth shut because we feel safer that way. We have to aggressively get out there and change the world, and it's just one person at a time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's one person at a time. Let me just say this, the whole refugee issue, it's an incredibly complex issue, and it's a conundrum, a divine conundrum the Lord's allowing us believers to be in. Now, first of all, let me just, for clarity for our listeners, I agree that the refugee issue is a crisis. I am not in favor of Muslim immigration. When you look at Western Europe, it's a nightmare. There are incredible negative ramifications. However, we are disciples of Yeshua. We're disciples of Jesus. We're called to imitate Him. We're called to put Him and the gospel first, even above our own life. Now, whether you're opposed to the refugees or not, that's irrelevant, because we are called to reach the ones that are here. We pray and we say, Lord, reach the Middle East with the gospel. Reach into Syria. It says in the scriptures, it says, pray therefore that the Lord would send laborers into the harvest. Well, we've been praying, Lord, send laborers into the harvest field. And by and large, we haven't.
Right. We haven't done that responsibility, so the harvest is coming to us.
The Lord
inadvertently.
The Lord is bringing them to us. Now, in the United States, we have a small amount compared to Europe. And this is the other thing too. As Americans, one of the problems with an American mentality is that we tend to observe wars almost like it's the kickoff to a football game. Well, the ground war has just begun, and we sit in our lazy chairs eating popcorn with the bravery of being out of range, or at least most of our history we've been out of range as we watch wars in the Middle East. Well, now the Middle East is no longer just over there. The Lord's allowing it. If you're in Europe, it's just, they walked right into your backyard. Now, in the United States, they're coming over. Again, politically, whether we like it or not, they're here. So we prayed, Lord, reach them there. We didn't do it. The Lord allowed them. And we have to say, the Lord is allowing them to be here. We have a responsibility. Now, let me say this. When I first came to faith, I used to go into Boston. I would fill my back pocket with little New Testaments. None of my drug friends wanted to talk to me anymore. And so I was all alone. I would go into Boston. Anybody that would be willing to listen to me, I wanted to talk about God. I wanted to talk about Jesus. I wanted to talk about the Bible. And I found that most Americans didn't want to talk to me. Now, I would run into Jehovah's Witnesses. They'd talk to me a little bit until they found out that I could tear apart their theology. Then they would label me a
knowledgeable
goat.
of the Bible. Okay,
Right.
we'll stay away from that.
They would label me a goat and then leave. Then I ran into Muslims. I started bumping into Muslims. And what I found about Muslims is that, first of all, most have more of an Eastern culture. And what that means is this, is that they can sit down and they can have an argument and, arms flailing, a little bit of spit on each other's face and argue about intense things. And then at the end of it, they go, okay, my friend, I enjoyed this. Let's do it again tomorrow.
Yeah.
And you go, there's none of this, oh, he's so fighty, negative vibes, And I'm from the East Coast, so, we're sort of halfway to the Middle East. Like, I understand that, but in the West, you don't want to have any contention. They love getting into the debate. And I'm someone who learns a lot from debate. So I ran into Muslims, and here's what I found. You could introduce yourself. I'm Joel. I believe that Jesus is the divine Son of God in the flesh. What's your name? You could actually lead with that.
That open, that up front.
And Muslims actually love to talk about the things that I love to talk about. They love to talk about God, the Bible, Jesus. Now, granted, they're going to argue with me. They're going to argue with you, and they're going to be, I say Muslims are like Jehovah's Witnesses on steroids. They are trained and prepared to win the Christian to the Islamic faith, and they've actually been pretty successful. But here's the thing. We are stewards of the most superior, perfect, amazing message that the universe has ever known. We are the stewards of the gospel. We are the stewards of the very words of life. We have the only message that can save them from the lake of fire, and we have to be confident in the message that we have, in the superiority of the incredible counterfeit message that they have. Emotionally inferior, logically, historically inferior, horrible counterfeit. We have the truth. So first of all, we have to, as Westerners, we have to recover a sense of confidence. Most Christians are afraid to talk to Muslims. I go, why? You have the very words of life. And so let me just say this. Muslims love to talk about the things they're a very God-conscious people. If there's one, Muslims are as different as people are different. But if there's one thing that you can say about Muslims, they are a very God-conscious people. And so if you're an evangelist, the Islamic world, it is an evangelist playground. It is an evangelist playground. And American Christians need to wake up to that. There is an opportunity right in our backyard. And we're allowing our fear and our prejudice and all of the negative news, and that's all legitimate, that's all real, but we're allowing that to shape our actions. And it's causing us to fail to be faithful stewards of what the Lord has commanded us to do. And so if we'll go out there, if we'll start engaging Muslims, if we'll start loving them, and there's been polls that have been done that say that 85% of Muslims that come to faith, they identify the reason they came to faith as they say, because a Christian showed me love.
Yeah.
It's not because the Christian had all of the superior apologetics, and I'm all for apologetics. I believe that we need to know the scriptures. I believe we need to train ourselves. I believe we need to be equipped to reach the Muslim world because it is the Goliath of our day. It's the great final challenge for the church. But, somebody without any apologetics, without any knowledge of Islam, we can go up to a Muslim, we can invite them to go out for dinner, to talk, to have lunch, to come to our house. They understand that hospitality, and they will sit down and they'll listen. And if we are a people of the cross, if we are people who understand what it means to imitate Jesus and lay down our lives sacrificially, Muslims will see that because, as it says in the Bible, Paul, Peter, don't be like the Gentiles, for they lord it over one another. In other words, the Gentiles are not a people of the cross. Muslims don't understand true biblical Jesus kind of love. And we are the people that can demonstrate that to them, and they'll be drawn. And there's a lot of other things that you can do, but there is an opportunity in front of us. And God help us if we fail. We haven't gone to them. He's bringing them to us. We have to make the most of this opportunity.
We're going to be, after this next series, we're going to be reintroducing Kamal Saleem, who we had here. And here's a man who came in as a terrorist, as a political terrorist, a very high ranking. And yet what happened to him after an automobile accident? It was believers that took care of him, and he saw the love, and it completely changed his life. And now he's going back into the Muslim world, and he's teaching. Goes right into Dearborn, outside of Detroit, right into the hotbed, and very boldly speaking there. And this is what you're saying as far as loving them. You've taken this almost to an extreme. Aid to refugees, going behind, beyond the lines where people are supposed to go. Tell us a little bit. I know there are some things that we can't talk about, because these are active things that are going on. But actually taking help to the people that are desperate, the people that are being butchered. You're getting in there and ministering the things that they need.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just simple. I mean, the Lord says, the scriptures say the Lord causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. And so we don't just love our brothers. The scriptures say we're to love our enemies, our theological enemies, our political enemies, our military enemies. Mm-hmm. And so I'm working with a few different ministries, one of which is FAI, Frontier Alliance International. They're in northern Iraq, in a few different places in the Middle East. And so what we've been doing since the Mosul offensive in northern Iraq, this is the Iraqi military, the Kurdish military, that's the Peshmerga, along with this other group called the Hashd al-Shabi, which is a Iranian-backed Shia militia. They are all in the process of kicking ISIS out of the city of Mosul. Now, Mosul, by the way, is ancient Nineveh. This is the capital of ancient Assyria. And so I was there September 11th, northern Iraq. This is 15 years after 9/11. We, along with some of the leaders of FAI, met with some of the generals on the northern front with the Kurds. And the Kurdish military, again called the Peshmerga, that's about 150,000 civilian soldiers. So they rotate in and out, and they had the whole northern front. They had, at the time, one ambulance. One ambulance. You know, we say, should the United States be helping the Kurds? They're pretty much the only ones that were actively fighting ISIS. One ambulance. So
one ambulance for them. And what was it? I think that Obama and Hillary left 2,300 Hummers for ISIS.
For ISIS.
Yeah, I mean just Hummers itself, along with millions of dollars worth of equipment. And the people that are actively fighting ISIS, though, they have one ambulance. That's our total help so far.
Yep. So yeah, I mean, here's a lot of my friends. They're living up there among the Kurds, and they say, the Lord, you always say the Lord, He meets the prostitute where she is, He meets the drug. Well, so when your friends and your neighbors are about to go to war, and listen, when you get, as a missions organization, you get involved in Middle Eastern armies, you need to be very careful because you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. But if there's a classic case of where it's pretty clear, fighting ISIS, this is a good cause. So basically, they said, here's our neighbors, they're about to go to war. How do we help them? How do we minister Jesus? How do we love them? And the answer is we save their lives. We stop the bleeding. We buy ambulances. And so we raised money, we bought a handful of ambulances. We started cycling in Christian doctors, medics. And as a result, we gained their trust. And now we've been able to go past the red line into Mosul. We've been ministering to the Arab Sunnis. Now these are the folks, many of them received ISIS. And I'll tell you the story. The general on the northern front, he said this to some of the leaders at FAI. They said, listen, we've watched, and the only people who treat their enemies with kindness are the Christians. They said, we don't have any grid for that. We said, but if we are going to stop the cycle of murder and violence in Iraq, the only way we're going to do it is if again, the Kurdish people have been abused by the Sunni Arabs. They said, we are going to treat our enemies with kindness. So as they're taking Mosul, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of families are fleeing. The Kurdish people are meeting these Arabs with incredible kindness. And many of them are the ones that were killing and taking their children and so forth. So it's because of the Christian witness. And then at the end of the night, the general sits down with these young doctors, Christians, medics, and they open up the Bible, they open up the Quran, they start talking God, the Bible, talking about the gospel. And it's because of the love that Christians are showing that the message is going forth in northern Iraq, and there are many people that are being touched in a powerful way. This is the type of approach that Christians are going to have to take in the years ahead. We're going to have to willing to lay down our lives, even for our enemies, to see the gospel go forward.
Now, when you talk about the support, the ambulances, what you're putting into that, you're talking about it takes a lot of money to do that. It's very expensive. Every vehicle is expensive. So you're really raising a lot of money for this cause to help these people then, and just laying it in their hands.
Yeah, but by the same token, we do it on a shoestring budget. I mean, relatively speaking, it's a drop in the bucket. There is an ocean of need, an ocean of opportunity. And but that's what Jesus did, is He laid everything down for us because He loved us so much, and that's what we're called to do as well.
Well, we've got to take a break, but when we come back, Joel, I'd like you to take us all the way back to where your ministry was really getting kicked off, and where you really got baited by the Almighty. You got, I call it deceived by the Almighty, where He baits you into something. It looks like everything's taken care of, and then just like that, you lose everything. And I told Joel as we were speaking, I wish that all of you could be with us, as we just are able to just sit around for hours and for days and talk about these things. So you get just a little bit of a snippet on here. But I say that, I really can't trust anyone. I can't trust any minister until they've lost everything and they keep doing the work of the ministry when they've lost it all and there is no hope and the Almighty comes through for them. And what I've seen, and Joel has spoken to me about this, just the fact that they this organization is raising the money to be able to minister to these people where Jonah was told to go and he refused to go. Now they are going into the place that Jonah refused to go, and they are providing these people. See, they're not raising money to buy jets and helicopters so they can fly around the world and raise more money. So they can live in mansions. What they're doing is raising money to get to people so they can buy them ambulances to keep them alive so that they can then speak the truth to them.
With Islamic influence now firmly seated in the Western world, undeniable progression toward the end times is well underway. What role does Islam play in the fulfillment of biblical prophecy?
I believe the Islamic world is a missionary evangelist playground, and I want to see and I want to be part of the things that the Holy Spirit is doing in the earth, and there are amazing things that He's doing.
In What in the World is Happening Before He Returns, Joel Richardson and Michael Rood reveal how to bring the truth of Yeshua to a Muslim world until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in.
It's like, get out there, we got to change the world because the world is changing and it's going to devour our children and our grandchildren.
Order What in the World is Happening Before He Returns right now on DVD, Blu-ray, or USB. You'll get all 4 episodes as seen on Shabbat Night Live.
What if our priorities were a little more focused on the gospel? I think the world would be a radically different place.
Pre-order now or order online at aroodawakening.tv/happening.
I've often said, Joel, that I think that just about all the Christians in America would be Muslims if they were raised in Iraq. And just because most people don't think outside of the box that they were raised in anyway. And it's a rare thing when that happens. But we see that you are able to reach into that world and communicate the truth of the gospel and to pull these people out of darkness. And so much so, not just here in America, but you're actually going in there, into Iraq and into those war-torn areas to be able to minister to these people and reach them. Tell us a little bit more about what's going on over there in the Middle East, because I think a lot of people don't realize that Persia was basically a Christian nation, and what is happening over there is just, it's a travesty.
Yeah, in Persia, I mean, there was a tremendous believing community there in Persia in the 7th century. Muhammad's general, his name was Al-Maktoumi. His name translates into English as the sword of Allah. And he came, and people always say, well, is Islam peaceful, or is it imperialist, or what? The story is he came and he sent a letter, an invitation, an evangelistic appeal to the leaders of Persia, and he said to the leaders of Persia, he said, submit to Islam and it will go well with you. Otherwise, I bring you a people who love death as much as your people love drinking wine. And of course they said, well, we thank you for your invitation, but we must renege. And so he came in, and the story is that he dug a trench, and he beheaded so many men at the mouth of the trench, he was trying to make the trench become a river of blood. And so this is the story of how Persia, this once again very great believing community, was forced to become Muslim. It was at the hand of the invading Arabs, and ever since then, this suffocating presence, this life-squelching presence has been over. This beautiful former, they had such a friendly relationship historically with Israel. It's been choking them out. Well, of course, we all know about the Iranian Revolution, 1979. Ayatollah Khomeini comes in, throws off the Shah, establishes Islamic Shia. Within the Islamic world, you've got Sunni and Shia. Shia are the minority sect. They're about 15%. They're probably, if to use an analogy, a little bit more like Catholics. They kind of have icons and they pray through their imams. These are sort of the successors of Muhammad and so forth. Then you have the Sunnis. The Sunnis are about 85% of the world, and they are a little bit more purists, maybe a little bit more like what you would say are Protestants. But so Ayatollah Khomeini established this Shia Islamic law over Iran. Well, what's happened, and what's amazing, and this is how God works, is that was 1979, so now we're dealing with 38 years since the Iranian Revolution. Today in Iran, and most people don't realize this, Islam is dead. Islam is dead. The vast majority of the people in Iran, they want nothing to do. They are sick of it. The mosques are empty. Now, there is this religious class, this ruling religious class. Of course, the government and the way that Iran works, the whole nation is just a giant mafia state. So, if you tell on your neighbor that you can hear them maybe having a Christian worship, saying praise the Lord, or they're having people come over their house, having an underground church meeting, something like that, you report your neighbors, you're going to move up and get paid higher. The whole country's so poor. And so it really is this giant mafia state. Well, in the midst of all of this, the people are crying out. It says in Job, are not those who are in a heap of rubble, do not those who are in a heap of ruin cry out to the Lord. And so the Lord uses crisis. The Lord used crisis in my life to bring me to Himself. Most people don't just wake up one day and say, man, my life is wonderful. I think I'll convert. I think I'll give myself to Yeshua and to the Almighty. So the people in Iran are crying out, and there is, believe it or not, the fastest growing church movement, the fastest growing believing community in the world, in the nation of Iran. It's approximately 20% growth per year. That means every 5 years it doubles.
Well, that's just the opposite of what Christianity is doing in the West, which is plummeting. Right. And so 20% growth a year.
It's amazing. Right now, and granted, right now out of 4 kids in American churches, 4 kids that grow up, only 1 will remain in church. 3 will leave. Now granted, some of them are still believers, but they're just dropping out of the church system. I understand that, but many are actually leaving. People today in the United States, your kids, if you have children, teenagers, they are more likely to know an atheist than they are to know a believing Christian. That's actually where we are today. Again, the movement in Iran is small numerically, but the growth is massive. And here's one of the amazing things, is when you ask most people, you say, what do you think of when you think of Iranians? They're going to go, I think of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, I think of the turban mullahs, I think of these people chanting death to America, death to Israel. Well, the fact of the matter, as I said, that the church is growing there, but the particular network that I work with a network called GCM, and this is probably the fastest growing network in Iran. They have been reading the scriptures, they've been listening to the Holy Spirit, they have fallen in love with Israel. They're praying for Israel. They are interceding, and they're actually even asking, how can we, as Iranians, send missionaries to preach the gospel in Israel? And they even participate, some of them even have a form of what I'll call Davidic worship, where you go to some of these messianic gatherings, some of these Sukkot gatherings, and they'll get out and get into sort of the more than just Israeli folk dancing, but a real biblical form of Davidic worship. And they've actually embraced that in the nation of Iran. Most people have never had a chance to peek behind the curtains because obviously they'll be killed.
Right, and I didn't know how much you could say about that and all, but you showed me one of these underground films of these people dressed in blue and white, Israel's colors, doing Davidic dance, doing worship in Iran, and of course can't show it because their faces cannot be seen. They'd be hunted down. But truly moving that these people have a love for Israel, and they understand understand prophetically, and this is what we began the broadcast with, is that most people in the Western world think the very next thing to happen is the return of Yeshua, the return of Jesus, and they ignore all of the prophecies. But yet these people understand that there are things that are going to be transpiring. They want to get involved. They want to enter into this thing of provoking the Jews to jealousy and holding forth the word to them.
Yeah, and I have to mention this sort of as a side note because, so many Christians today believe in what's called the doctrine of imminence, that Jesus could return any day, that the rapture could happen any day. Just last year in Oklahoma City, I debated Dr. Tommy Ice. He's actually the president of the Pre-Trib Research Center down there in Dallas. And, I brought up the issue, and I always like to ask Christians who, and listen, the rapture it's not an issue to divide over, but it's an incredibly important pastoral issue.
Oh, it is.
I mean, it's very important. And, for most Christians out there who, if you believe in the pre-trib rapture, again, not an issue of contention, but I have to ask you this. The scriptures are very clear that before Jesus could return, the state of Israel had to be reestablished. So before 1947, was the doctrine of imminence still valid? And so I brought this up to Dr. Tommy Ice, and he said, well, but see, Israel could have been established in a day. The entire nation could be established. And I was like, no, I don't think that that's legitimate. I think most people know these things take a little bit of time. And likewise, there are quite a lot of other prophecies beyond the establishment of the state of Israel that need to be fulfilled. Mm-hmm. And so, look, if there's one doctrine that I hope I'm wrong about, it's the rapture issue. But I think it's wisdom for all of life. Hope for the best, that's fine. But by God, be prepared for the worst.
Yeah, and I think that's well taken. Yeah, you say it's a pastoral issue because this is what transpired when Corrie Ten Boom, when she went to China, the people there after the Communist Revolution, that millions and millions of people were slaughtered, and they had no idea that this wasn't going on around the world. Mm-hmm. 60 million people dead, and this looked like to them the Great Tribulation. I mean, what could be greater than that? Right. And you have no idea what's going on in the outside world. And they had been taught by American Christian missionaries that we would not go through any tribulation, that we'd all be raptured out of here before anything bad happens. And they pled with her and said, please go back and tell your people, the Christians, not to teach this anymore because it caused so many people to fall because they were not strong and they lost their faith because they were not prepared for hardship. Mm-hmm. And so Corrie Ten Boom, she listened to that. She heard it, and she came out and condemned that teaching. And of course, I was a proponent of the pre-tribulation rapture. I was an ultra-dispensational pre-tribulation seeker rapturist for 20 years of my life. And I had to repent because I was painting over the eyelids of my sleeping congregation that we'd ought to be out of here in the middle of a 5-course Sunday brunch at the country club after church on Sunday. And it's just, that's not the picture in the scriptures. We are looking at what the prophets are speaking of. Israel is going to be invaded again. There is going to be a hellacious war at the beginning when the fall feasts begin their fulfillment, mm-hmm. a hellacious war, and out of that, the Almighty is going to show his hand, and it's going to wake up the world. Mm-hmm. It's going to wake up the world. We're still going to be here because there are things that transpire after that, and that's before the Messiah comes to rule and reign upon the earth for 1,000 years. We've got a long row ahead of us to be hoeing, and we've got to be strong to be able to do this. So, I'm going to be very adamant about this. I mean, I think that this is what we need to take our responsibility seriously and not just be sitting on our couch watching TV waiting for the return. It's like, get out there. We got to change the world because the world is changing and it's going to devour our children and our grandchildren. They're going to be fodder.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is biblical faith 101. Be prepared to face, at the very least, antichrists and tribulations. And if you have to face the Antichrist and the Great Tribulation, then you'll be prepared for that. But we need to be prepared. You brought up Corrie Ten Boom. Well, there's no question, anybody who studies the scriptures knows that the time of Jacob's trouble is yet future. Jesus said, he said very clearly, he said that there is a time coming of unparalleled distress, such as has never been from the beginning of creation until that time, will never be equaled. And so this great tribulation is coming. Well, if we are in no way, shape, or form prepared for that, then how will we raise up the Corrie Ten Booms for tomorrow? You know, how will we raise up this largely Gentile believing community to stand with Israel in the midst of her time of distress? And I believe that this is part of the call of the Gentile church to lay down our lives, not just for our enemies, but also for those who are our big brothers in the faith, according, you know, who are considered beloved according to the covenants and all that God has done with His covenant people. And so, you know, I believe that raising up a Corrie Ten Boom movement is one of the primary calls of the believing community in this hour, is to see what's ahead according to the word of the prophets and prepare, not just to wish them well, adios, hope you make it through, we're out of here. Now again, I want to be clear, I believe that we will not be here for the wrath of God. I believe that we're not appointed to wrath, but there's a distinction between the wrath of God and the tribulation of Satan that is coming.
Absolutely. I think that's where most people just, they're not even watching closely the English words here, because we are saved from the wrath to come, but the wrath in the book of Revelation is after the last trump. After the last trump, when the dead are raised, the righteous rewarded, and then the wrath is poured out. Before then, the wrath of Satan, the wrath of this world, I mean, you're right in the hotbed. You're seeing the wrath. You're seeing, we know, the testimonies of that have come out, the Christian girls are just, who are crying out for America to carpet bomb them so they're not raped 30 times before they're fed any breakfast that day.
Right.
And this is the world that you are entering into to try to help these people, to provide whatever relief and rescue that can be provided with what little resources that you have. If you had $50 million, that'd still be a drop in the bucket.
Right. And and I'll say this, but people have a lot of different opinions on politics. Thank God for this current administration, because the shift, the transition that has taken place over the past few months from the previous 8 years is really, people, you go up there into Kurdistan and they love Donald Trump. They are so excited. My daughter right now is in Uganda and everyone says, congratulations on your new president.
Yeah.
All over the world, except for Europe, a lot of people love the current administration because they see the good that he's actually doing in bringing attention to this torment that the Christians have been under, and actually bringing genuine, real relief rather than just leaving them to suffer. But there's so many amazing stories. There's so many, miracles that are coming out of the Islamic world. Again, I don't want to downplay the realities of all that are unfolding, but a lot of Christians, we only see the bad news. We only see the bombs and the killings and so forth, and there's a lot of that.
And that's basically what the media feeds on for their ratings. So they give us no choice. They're not bringing us good news, are they?
No, it's not. And this is why it's important with Christian TV, TV like this, to testify concerning the good things that Yeshua is doing, even in the hardest and darkest places. I sat with a young Christian, girl. This was last year, and I interviewed her, and she was a former Muslim, a former radical Shia Muslim. And I asked her, I said, how did you come to faith? She told this story. She said, when she was 11 years old, she was in the nation of Iran. Her father left her and her mother. And in Iran, if a woman does not have a male covering, most likely they go and try to get a job. They're going to be exploited. They're going to be raped by their boss, almost as part of an internship, whether they want to hire them or not. So her mother was very devout. She wouldn't take a job. And so the girl said, we were very, very poor. And she used to go and pray 8 hours a day at these shrines through the Shia imams for her mother's healing. She used to pray 8 hours a day. And she said, and then at 13, I didn't tell the story. At 13, the mother got cancer. So the father left the mother at 11. At 13, the mother got cancer. So this young girl used to go and pray 8 hours a day for her mother's healing. One day, she was about 16 years old, 15, 16, and for the first time in her life, someone told her about, they say in Arabic or Farsi, Yeshua. And someone told her about Yeshua. And so they said, this is all they said. They said, he's God and he answers prayers. Now, because the Shia are used to praying to the imams, she was very open to trying to pray to Jesus. Well, if Jesus answers prayers, let's try it. So she was all excited. She went home and she said her mother was just a complete wreck that day. And she said at 12 o'clock exactly, her mother died. And she was all distracted. Her mother died, and she said she just went into shock. Little 15, 16-year-old girl all alone. And she said she stood by her mother for 6 hours, and she just kept saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And she said she was in complete shock. So she died at 12. Her friend came over, spent some time with her, grieved with her, left. She said, still, I just stood there. At 6 o'clock at night, she remembered that someone had told her about Yeshua earlier in the day. And so she began to pray for the first time in her life to Yeshua. And she said, Yeshua, she said, this person told me that you answer prayers. And I was all excited, thinking maybe you'll heal my mother. But now that's too late. But I'm all alone. I don't want to become a prostitute, which was probably her only option. She said, what? She said, can you help me? That's all she said, can you help me?
Can you help me?
And her mother started coughing. So, skeptic that I am, the first thing I thought was, well, her mother must have been mostly dead. You know, she must have been in a coma. She must have been appearing to be dead. Because this is the way skepticism works. You know, it makes so much more sense that of all the moments and the seconds in a day and in an hour, in a lifetime, the one moment that this little radical Shia Muslim prayed to Jesus, Yeshua, for the first time in her life, it just happened to coincide. It was just a coincidence that it lined up with the moment that her mother woke up from what appeared to be 6 hours of death. She said her mother started freaking out. I don't know what that means. Her mother got up, started freaking out. They went to the hospital. She was there for a few days. They did all kinds of tests. And her mother did not have a lick of cancer. She was completely fine. So this was about 11 or 12 years ago. Both her and her mother are serving the Lord full time in one of the most restricted nations in the world, proclaiming the gospel, seeing converts come to faith. This is the kind of thing that the Lord is doing in the darkest and hardest part of the places. People go, why do you go over there? Why do you risk your life? Because I want to be where God is moving. I believe the Islamic world is a missionary evangelist playground, and I want to see and I want to be part of the things that the Holy Spirit is doing in the earth, and there are amazing things that He's doing.
Now, Joel, you're going over there. You say, you know, it's a dangerous part of the world, but you have a wife. You have 5 children, is it?
Yeah.
And where are they on this whole journey here? Because, you know, here you leave America on a plane. They have no idea if they're going to see you again.
I'll just say my wife trusts me. She knows that I'm not a 20-year-old looking for adventure, you know, and we're not foolish. You know, you have to know people on the ground. You have to know where you're going. You don't just hop in a vehicle and start driving over mountains in northern Iraq. So you always have to use wisdom. And there are stable areas, but my family also likewise, we have a commitment to the gospel. My oldest daughter, when we dedicated her to the Lord, we said, and if she should ever choose to become a missionary, we say yes. Well, it's hard. My daughter's in Africa right now. She's 18, and
Uganda is not. I've been there. It's not an easy place at all.
Yeah, and it's relatively one of the safer nations, but it's heartbreaking to send your children. But you know, this is the way we are right now in the United States. Is if someone, you know, at 18, they say, I'm going to go join the Marines because all this terrorism is... Most churches, they're going to pat the parent on the back and say, your son is making a noble choice. They're standing up for America and freedom. And they go, it's a big risk. They could die. Yeah, and they go, but it's a good thing that they're doing. But if a young 18, 19-year-old kid said, I'm going to give myself to the gospel, to become a missionary, I'm going to Afghanistan, people are going to go up to that parent and say, does your son or daughter have any idea what they're doing? They could be killed. You know, and this really speaks to, now look, I believe it's noble to do both, but in the United States, in the churches, we tend to take a higher value in military over the gospel. And look, I supported invading Iraq after 9/11. I was, you know, when George Bush stood on the rubble of the World Trade Center and said, the people that brought these buildings down, they're going to hear from us. I cheered. I said, amen. I was just, I go to Iraq pretty regularly now, and I preached in the largest Arab church in northern Iraq, and I'm looking in the faces of the brothers and sisters whose world, whose nation, we tried, we meant well, but we destroyed it. And I say, what would have happened? We've lost 4,000 young men and women in Afghanistan, Iraq. What would happen if we had sent 4,000 gospel-proclaiming, fiery-eyed young missionaries? How would the Middle East look right now if we went to lay down our lives to see people saved rather than just to get revenge and so forth? And I'm not saying, again, I know there's a time for war. I'm not a pacifist. But what if our priorities were a little more focused on the gospel? I think the world would be a radically different place.
Joel, let me ask you about this. We see your books, your videos, the body of work you do. It looks like you just spend your life in an ivory tower, just putting out your intellectual prowess out to the world. You're on television shows, radio shows all over the world. On Sunday, you speak to a congregation of 2,000 people. And then the next morning, just a few years ago, then reality hits, because what is it really? How are you really surviving?
Yeah, well, so, I had a business for over 20 years. It was a decorative painting contracting company, and we're ministering, at the same time. And so, I'd go speak at a congregation, and then the next day...
Everyone, you get the honor, the applause, and the next day...
Yeah, Joel Richardson, yay! And then the next day, someone's yelling at you because you didn't properly fold up the drop cloth and this sort of thing. And I did my best to embrace that because I find it much more grounding. I call it the illusion of the platform. Everyone says, here comes the man of God. And then you go home and your wife says, put down the toilet seat, you pig. And I go, I'll take that because that's a lot more real. A couple of years ago, I had a friend who came and he said, I would really like you to give up your job and to consider becoming a full-time missionary, and I'll support you in that. And I did that. I stepped out, and
and that was substantial, where you could fund your ministry with what was being offered to you. And it was a wealthy person, flew in a private jet to meet you.
Yeah, and so I did it. I stepped out in faith, and 4 months later, he, at age 54, had a sudden massive heart attack and passed away. And it was, in my opinion, a great loss to the kingdom because he was a great hidden man of God. But this was the Lord's way of pushing me out of the nest to say,
because you made the step, you made the decision. Okay, this is it. You're stepping out in faith, and bam, it's gone.
Yeah, and maybe even sticking with my job painting for all those years. Maybe it was a little bit of my own religious hang-up. Maybe God was saying, no, I'm calling you to give yourself to this. But so now I'm doing it full time, and I have the support of my family, and I do have a growing prayer network, and the Lord's really breathing on it. So I'm happy, despite everything, that the Lord His hand has been on all this the past few years.
And to see you having put everything on the line, having lost everything, and yet continuing on, never giving up, and really doing a job that most people would shirk from in fear. And I want you to come back. I want you to be with us again, because I want you to step into this, how to reach Muslims. I want you to go into some of the real practical things concerning that, and to give us a little bit more of a history, a background, because that really is one of your great fortes, the history, the background of Islam. Mm-hmm. And so it's great to have you with us. Joel will be back with us for Shabbat Night Live next week, but until then, I would like to leave you with this blessing. Yivarechecha Yehovah v'yishmerecha. Yair Yehovah panav elecha v'chunecha. Yisa Yehovah panav elecha v'yisem lecha shalom. B'shem Yeshua HaMashiach Sar Shalom. Yehovah bless you and keep you. Yehovah make His face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Yehovah lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. In the name of Yeshua, the Prince of Peace. Amen, amen. Well, Shabbat Shalom to our fans. Shavua Tov. Have a good week, and we'll see you back here next week on Shabbat Night Live.